everyone. I'm very honored and pleased to have with me Anil Peter, who is the Global Head of Market Access and Pricing at the Point of Care Division of Abbott Laboratories. Thank you for coming.
Likewise, the pleasure's mine.
Maybe for everyone who doesn't know Abbott, would you mind giving just a brief overview of what your company does?
Yes, so Abbott is a over 150 years old company. It spans several divisions, going from medical devices to nutrition to established pharmaceuticals. I happen to be in the diagnostics division, and specifically, my division uh, is responsible for these handheld analyzers that allow a physician or a nurse practitioner or a nurse in a hospital to get you relatively in a quick time your blood test results. So everything you typically associate with a lab, you could now get at the bedside using a simple blood draw. So that's what my division does.
Okay, awesome. And I know you have a PhD in economics. I would love to learn a little bit more about your path into pricing, kind of what influenced that and what made you branch out into pricing.
So I didn't plan on it. So
Uh-huh.
as for most people, I was very much interested in the relationship between economics and technology. And that's what I did my PhD in. I worked for several years in the IBM research labs during the height of the dot com boom, which soon became the dot com bust, which is how I entered pharma. And the most logical place, given my background as an economist, was to work either in corporate strategy or in access and pricing. And
Hmm.
that's how I first started in corporate strategy and migrated into access and pricing.
So what does pricing actually mean at Abbott and particularly for the point of care division? What are some of the pricing challenges that you're dealing with?
So, so I stepped into a role that had to be created because historically, pricing was under finance.
Hmm.
And uh, what had me come to the point of care division is they were launching a new test, the test for TBI concussion. And they had, for the first time, the opportunity to make the price because it was best in class, first in class. And the question was, what do you price it at? And so with that being the history, we I stepped into that role. It turned out SKP had already done an analysis, so I was not stepping into a blank world. There was some priors in terms of what price we should be setting it at globally, and so it started from there. And since then, I've branched out to doing more portfolio level pricing as well.
Uh-huh. And maybe more in general terms, I know you have a very long history in pricing. What are some of the most challenging problems that you've been helping to solve in your career, if you kind of think back?
So launch pricing is typically the biggest challenge. I think, especially when you're talking about best in class, first in class kind of product. There is no competitor out there. Uh, the alternative might be in pharmaceuticals, so it might be another class of pharmaceutical products. In diagnostics, it could be another standard of care, which might be imaging, as was the case with the TBI test. You do CT scans to determine if a person has
Mhm.
potentially concussions. So you don't have a reference to work with for a best-in-class, first-in-class product. Now, if you are launching into an already crowded marketplace where there's several other competitors, you have some good references there, and that makes the pricing challenge much less. But most of my biggest challenges have been working with best-in-class, first-in-class products. The other piece where I feel like I've made significant contributions is really around uh, the whole issue around price elasticity. And
Right.
this had to do first in my first pharma job, which was around contracting and making a decision on when do you contract. Because you're talking about millions of dollars of rebates going out to an insurer, and you have to see is it cost justifiable? Can you make a business case for it from a uh, from a from a margin perspective? And part of what you do as part of the business case analysis is to determine uh, what extent does this insurer have in terms of control on what finally gets prescribed. So you have basically a possibility where you contract and the insurer has no control on what finally gets prescribed, in which case, you spending all your effort in trying to buy that business is not really going to pay off. Versus the extreme case where you have an insurer who has a lot of control, and if you don't contract, you could really lose a lot of business on account.
So there's really a division here between who actually has to pay
Yes.
for a product
Yes.
versus who
Yes.
makes or at least
Yeah.
to a large degree influences the decision. There's also, the pharmaceutical industries has actually one challenge that I think you can only find in the software industry elsewhere, which is it's very difficult to do cost plus,
Right.
right? So the variable costs of a pill, let's say, are close to zero, but you have the additional challenge that you have massive investments in R&D and limited time to recoup the investment. So you essentially forced to do value-based pricing.
Right. Except in countries where they force you to a cost plus sort of pricing. So, and that includes countries like Japan.
Exactly. So maybe thinking back, not just about success stories and things that worked out well, but maybe some of the challenges that didn't work out too well, and pricing bloopers, or let's call them great learning exercises. Is there anything that comes to mind?
So, yeah, I would say looking back, diabetes is one category where it comes to mind. So I told you about my greatest contribution in this whole contracting space. Uh, with diabetes, you had a situation where the market was becoming very competitive. There was a lot of pressure from the field to actually provide these big discounts.
Uh-huh.
And when we look back about 2 years later, we found there was no relationship between the discounts that were being given versus the business we got. Um, and I would say I wish that analysis had been done much earlier, and I wish we had pushed back a lot more with the field on that account.
Interesting.
It was one of those things where things were changing really rapidly, and the analytics and the business cases were not keeping up.
Talking about rapid changes, right now we are in an inflationary environment that affects consumers and a lot of businesses in a significant way. How does inflation impact Abbott or the pharmaceutical industry overall?
So I can speak to Abbott. It's much lower margin than pharmaceuticals. So with all our cost of goods going up, there's also supply issue
Mhm.
as well. It's become a real challenge. So we're getting this real impact of a higher cost of goods, and we are stuck with contracts that run from anywhere from 3 years to 5 years, where the only price increase that has been built in was essentially health CPI,
Mhm.
which is running at 2%, when your cost of goods is going up at 8% and more. And that is a significant challenge. You short of pulling these contracts, there's not much you can do.
So, how do you deal with these inflation challenges? How do you actually, you know, work around it? Are there any concrete actions that companies like Abbott would implement?
The history on high inflation is going back 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And so there's not much institutional memory on what to do under conditions of high inflation. And so I think, like every other company, we're trying to work our way through it, the situation. Um, what we do know, for instance, is our cost of goods is going. That
Yeah.
we know.
Yeah,
That's the only certainty.
yeah.
How do we compensate for it? I think we're looking outside for suggestions on how that could possibly be handled. There's no one single solution you can implement. There's a number of little things you need to do. Hopefully, this will also result in a reset on how we think about our businesses. There was a lot of products that were portions of our business that we were giving for free, which we're now saying, okay, maybe we should not be doing that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole reset in thinking about our business model.
So not one silver bullet, but a lot of
Yeah,
many little things. Plus, kind of looking at the business model overall sounds like a lot of work.
Yes.
Who's doing that work? How is, for example, your pricing and market access department structured, and who are you guys reporting to?
So this portion, I've not has yet been deeply involved in.
Mhm.
I've been more focused on the new products and less on the legacy products. And so this is largely being undertaken by senior leadership and working with finance. Um, at some point, I will definitely want to be part of that whole conversation. But just given how we've historically been much more, pricing has been within the finance function, it continues to be that way even today. And they're looking at options within that context.
So within your group, how are you guys organized, and how much support do you have to look at pricing?
Yeah, so I'm basically the only access and pricing person in my division. I work closely with the markets, but they're marketeers. They're not pricing or access people. So a lot of my recommendations come at the global level, and I'm counting on the regions and the countries to implement it at a local level, providing basically a floor and a ceiling for them by way of guidance, and also suggestions on who needs to improve the various discount levels. So that's largely how it's been working. It's a very decentralized function within my division.
So do you require more C-level leadership buy-in, or is it rather the kind of the global leaders that need to be bought in your recommendations? Is it both?
I would say I would say moving pricing out of finance is the first responsibility I have. The next piece is really uh, having the senior leadership uh, drive that thinking down into the countries,
Mhm.
whereby it's not so decentralized as it is right now.
Mm.
So it is a process. I can't imagine it taking more than 2 years to achieve. We already with our recent product launch were able to kind of create a new model where we came up with a global list price suggesting regional price floors and ceilings, and the level of rebate that was allowed at various levels of leadership. So that should hopefully become the model for other legacy products as well.
I'm not sure how much you can share, but what's next? I know we discussed, that you guys are going down of measuring price elasticities in a very granular and scientific manner. So what are some of the kind of targets that you would like to get your organization to move to?
So I think the first thing is just kind of establish some baseline. And elasticity is a very, very good baseline.
Right.
I think every industry and every company should know what the elasticity of their products are, because those numbers tend to be pretty stable, change year to year.
Yeah.
In fact, if it's changing year to the year, you could be certain that the method is wrong.
Yeah.
Not that the elasticity is. So I think getting those baselines in place, establishing what margin expectations to have, I think that is another piece. And I think the other big piece which we need far more visibility on is the customer price sensitivity. Right now, I think we're largely depending on our sales reps to tell us that. I think there has to be a more systematic approach to building business cases, which involve an understanding of what is the price sensitivity of a customer, when is a bark, and when is the bark a bite.
Yeah.
So being able to distinguish customers in terms of who acts on their threats and who is just making noise,
Interesting. Yeah.
and who finally has control on their customers. That's the other portion of it, because you could be an aggressive negotiator, but you might have no control on what your customers ultimately do. And that's the situation with GPOs where they have hospitals who basically buy into their contracts, but if those contracts are not kind of uh, have a lot of bite into it, there's no control that exert. And the hospitals do what they want anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you could just look back at your career and how you started your pathway into pricing and give yourself, your younger self, any type of advice to make a successful career in pricing or things to do or to avoid, what would that be?
I would say economics. So you can come to pricing from several perspectives. I would say you could come from finance.
Hmm.
You could come from economics. You could come from marketing. You could come from uh, health economics, which is another, well, a subfield within economics. And I think each of those backgrounds will provide a different perspective. Um, I think finance is going to keep you much more grounded in costs.
Hmm.
Um, Economics will keep you very much grounded in the structure of industries. Marketing will keep you much more focused on how price is an overall element in the marketing mix and not a standalone component. And the health economics perspective will probably give you a much more grounding in the economically justifiable price. So I think any of these backgrounds are good backgrounds to come from. I think you just need to learn that your perspective is not the only one. That
That's
there are
interesting.
multiple perspectives to price. I think you should be relatively comfortable with numbers and looking at spreadsheets.
Hmm.
I think that's something I struggle with personally. I'm much more big picture,
Uh-huh.
but pricing is also a lot about details.
Yes.
And so I think you should be comfortable working with those details.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you for making time. It was very insightful, and I hope you all join us for next time.